What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Above Average Podcast. I'm Will. This is Ethan. This is episode 3. And what are we talking about today, Ethan?
Episode 3 on our new season.
On our new season, right? Season 2, episode 3.
And today we're talking about, we're going to start kicking this off because we did forget a couple things on our last podcast, which I guess, wash, rinse, repeat, do these things a couple times. But we're talking about imposter syndrome today.
Yeah.
That's our biggest topic because I think it relates to fitness. It relates to life in so many facets for people with their jobs, their careers, being a parent. I haven't even touched that category of imposter syndrome, but my parents had me when they were 22, 23. I cannot imagine that you even remotely know what's going on at that age to parent. So I think it's applicable to apply what, we discussed with imposter syndrome and what you can learn from it about, with fitness and what we do.
Yeah, it's a can of worms for sure. I feel like it, I feel like you're never not going to run into it, And that's what I've reasoned with myself after all this time. It's like, I don't think it ever completely goes away, but I just think you move up in levels.
Exactly. Yeah.
And because of that, like that's kind of what I fall back on when I feel like I'm feeling it. But I will say now, I don't think it comes up for me as much, but it still lingers a little bit,
Yeah.
And so I'll say the first time I really ran into it, and I think I knew that was what it was in college playing soccer. And this is funny because I've never really told this story before. And I don't know if my teammates...
Excellent.
Well, I don't know if my teammates would even listen to this or, no one from that time would probably even hear this unless I post it on Instagram. But in my sophomore year, our longtime coach retired. Okay. And Pitt soccer, for anyone that knows, it's not a secret. We were like a sleeping giant, right? In the ACC. The ACC is the best conference in college soccer. And Pitt was just shit. Dog shit. We didn't win a conference game for, I think, 5 years. Just really struggled. And so then, coach retires, new coach comes in, arguably one of the best, if not the best, in the college game.
Uh-huh.
And came in and just flipped our lives upside down. And the thing is I wouldn't consider myself someone that doesn't have high standards in how I operate, but in a situation where you're in a group, and what's the saying where it's like when you sink to your, what I'm saying? You don't rise to the occasion, you sink to your level of training or something like that.
Yes. Yeah. You fall to your level of training.
Right.
That's what you lean on.
Yeah. And so that's obviously not 100% of a match of what I'm trying to say, but everyone else around me was doing the same things. And I think we all thought that we were pretty organized. And we came to find out that we were not at all. The locker room was a mess. And now that sticks with me. I go other places and I'm clean your shit up. It's just very little things that matter when you're trying to build a championship team, and
Right.
standards, very important. And I carried all of that with me now. But besides the off the field stuff, on the field, I was just I would have never been recruited to be on this team, because of for example, we are now becoming a top ACC school. I would have never been recruited to a top ACC school. I got recruited to a mediocre soccer ACC school basically. And so I was having this moment of for about a year, I was should I even be here? And I almost transferred about 4 weeks in because I was under the impression that they wanted to kind of get us old guys out, bring in, new guys. And the new head coach talked me out of it. And that was another moment because I was oh shit, he doesn't actually think what I think he thinks.
Right.
And it still took some time to get used to it, but there was a lot of that throughout college soccer where I was I don't there's other guys, because Pittsburgh's not a hotbed for soccer. You're not getting recruited to go to big schools. You're not going to go to the MLS. We have, a USL team, which is Division II. We don't have any MLS academies. And that's where a lot of the big time Division I recruits come from now.
Yeah.
You're coming from an MLS academy or you're playing, as an amateur, with a professional club or something like that. And we just don't have that here. So it's almost soccer's gotten better overall, but it lags behind in other areas like Southern California, the DMV area, even Eastern Pennsylvania. So there was a lot of a lot of that feeling. But then it's the same thing. It's like you get to a point where you've done it for long enough and then it just fades out and then you take the next step and then it comes back in a little bit and then it's just a cycle, I think.
It's like, I think it's when you get a little bit older, you just get used to the fact that I will do something new and I've done something new before and it's just like a repetition again. You know, I mean, it's like going to the gym in a sense because you're having to flex this new part of you that is uncomfortable, and it's an uncomfortable part, but because it's not new anymore, and then it starts to progressively get easier because you just accept the fact you might not know everything, or you just meant to, you don't even necessarily look into the fact you might not know. You're just like, that's just a feeling. I do know. It's sort of like an if and, because there's a little bit of both there.
Yeah.
'Cause I felt the same way like in the Army. It was very funny. I felt this in college as well. So when I went into diving, this was the exact same thing because I went from high school to college diving, and I felt it a little bit, but I was still performing where I should be. So I was feeling a little bit more of a burnout feeling than imposter syndrome. But the Army was such a flip for me. I mean, this was like I went to the cadet schooling, and you should be, if you're going active duty, you go from being a cadet to then becoming an officer. So you're commissioning, and you should go to your job training and then go to your unit. That makes sense, right? Your job training, like going to basic training, sure. We kind of go to basic training as cadets during that time frame. There's like a couple different training academies that you go to in the summers. So I never had an internship, but then you go to your job training. Typically there, you might go to drum school or ranger school, depending on your job, and then you'll go to your unit after. So you're not like you're qualified. Yeah. The Army says you are qualified. Here's a check mark. You show up and you are in charge of a platoon when you're 22, 23 years old maybe, of most often people that have already deployed, or at least they've all been in the Army at least 4 to 10 years, at least. And you're in charge of them. Natural imposter syndrome. There's no way. There's no way that you step into that comfortable. There's no way. Like you fake it till you make it there.
Yeah.
Because you just have to. So I felt that, but what happened in the National Guard is when you go into the National Guard, you get assigned a unit before you go to your job training sometimes, which happens. So you just commissioned as an officer. You have the authority, in quotes, as an officer, but you haven't gone to your job training. So I did that for 4 months. No, I'm sorry. I did that for 6 months until I went to my job training where I would drill every month, brand new. And all I know is as much as a cadet knows, but I'm an officer and I'm their boss and I know nothing about the job that I'm in. That there's no level of comfort. I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
When I stepped on there the first day, I was beyond nervous. I was going to like shit my pants nervous, showing up to work being like, all right, I'm in charge of these guys. I've never even met them. I don't know their names. And turns out all of them had a combat patch, which means all of them had deployed except for like the newest privates. All of them had deployed at least once, most of them together, and most of them had stayed in the same unit. So you're walking into like big shoes that you don't even know were filled before you. You have no idea.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, so it's like, what do you do? Because I feel like in another context, when you're thrown into like a leadership position like that, like say we're just talking about like a job.
Yep.
Okay. I feel like there is a part of you that's able to like maintain some, like the leadership position, like you're still making the calls.
Yeah.
You can almost lean on the experienced people at the same time.
Yep.
Like you're not deferring leadership to them, but you're almost like involving them in the process.
Yes.
But you still have the final shot.
That's exactly what you have to do. So you get paired, like when you're a platoon leader, you're a lieutenant in the Army, you get paired with somebody who's a platoon sergeant, you both together run the platoon. One of them is more the admin side and the tactical planning side. And then the other one is more the hands-on side with the NCOs, the non-commissioned officers. So that is the head sergeant of that platoon, and you are the officer of that platoon. There's no other officers with you in that platoon, right? So you're paired with somebody with experience, you know. And now I can say these things now because I'm out of the Army, but I was paired with somebody. My first one was a not good person to work with at all. And so what's interesting is when you're a cadet, you learn you're going to be new. You're going to feel imposter syndrome. You're not going to know what the hell you're doing at all. And you're in charge of these people and you have to stand in front of them, talk to them, give any sort of input that you have tactically, operationally, but you're going to get paired with a really good NCO who's gone through the ranks. He's going to be in for 12 years at least, and he's going to be able to guide you. I got dog shit. I literally got dog shit. I mean, I got a really bad like truly bad E7 to work with. And before anybody on here says this, I was in the Army for 10 years. So this wasn't a one-off experience. I'd seen good, bad, and indifferent. But my first experience being brand new, I had somebody that the rest of the platoon hated. So I came in watching them disrespect this guy, and I was supposed to be his right-hand man. And I was like, oh no, this couldn't be worse of a situation. But you just have to overcome that feeling. And honestly, what we say in the Army is FITFO, figure it the fuck out.
Yeah.
Like, you're thrown in it, you're not going to flounder. Like, there's other people within the organization like that. The Army runs a certain way. It's going to keep running.
Yeah.
And you got to like run with it. But there's other people that can help you. So I learned how to find other people to help me instead of that guy, which I was told he's like, that's your mentor. And that wasn't my mentor. Other people in the unit were my mentor.
Yeah.
And then I got a really good person right after him. And I saw what right looked like. So, you know, it's everywhere. That feeling never goes away when you move jobs and stuff like that, but you just know how to adapt to it, feeling it more than once.
It's the same, but the Army is like, maybe not immediately, but life and death, you know, like if there's anywhere where it needs to be like a well-oiled machine, it's there, you know?
Yes.
And but I think about too is, you know, when I was coaching professional soccer, I started as a pro coach at 25. Like our captain on the team was 34 and I was a second assistant as a 25-year-old. And you would think that would have been a stretch of time where I like felt like the imposter syndrome, but
right.
You know, our head coach is like at the time he still is, but like extremely well-respected coach in US soccer. And, you know, I trust his judgment 100%. And so then I would always just come back to that. I'm like, well, if he thinks I can be here, then I can be here. Like that's all I ever really had to reason with myself. But still, beyond just that, it's just so delicate with how you, like when you're leading groups of people.
Yeah.
You know, because like you have to uphold a standard, but then it can be hard to do that because, you know, like you have to basically agree on what your standards are, and individuals might not agree with those standards all the time.
Yep.
And so then it's like, do I want this conflict today?
Yep.
But in your mind, you're like, I need to, like, I have to do it to uphold the standard. But it's hard. Like there's like that thickness in between it where it's like, I gotta like sweat right now because I need to like confront this person and be like, hey, why the fuck did you do that? You know, and I mean, that's why there's so many books about like leading groups of people.
Yes.
You know, because it's so different than anything. If you've never done it, there's just so many ways that you can mess it up. Yeah.
And what the Army taught me was, you know, extremely impactful experiences. They helped with imposter syndrome. They help with leadership, right? Because I was put in that spot. So most people probably didn't know that I was put in that exact spot. When they think of the Army, they're like, oh, well, that's great. Like you were totally prepared. I'm like, fuck no. We were not prepared. I was not prepared for leading people without the training. And then even the training after, I learned tactics so well, but I didn't even know admin paperwork. Like I didn't know how to counsel somebody. Like that's crazy to think about. The well-oiled machine of the Army taught me how to be operationally like in the field effective. But that's it.
Yeah.
So I still had to come in and learn how to lead. But the best experience I had was that deployment later. So there are so many things I wish I would have changed about how I treated different things being that young. Like I was too young and ill-prepared to really know. But one thing that was nice about this is to overcome imposter syndrome for me in general was getting put in it over and over again within the Army. Going on deployment was a really good example of that because you were at a job in a dangerous place that you cannot leave and you cannot quit. So you learn how to work with people. Yeah. You don't have an option and you're pinned to a corner and you're pinned to the wall. And it was right at this pivotal time. I was like 24 when we were on deployment where you're learning. Like, I think that's where your brain is like on the tail end of that developmental thing of like how you treat people, how you start building habits internally that you might not even realize. That starts like wrapping up around 25. You start to like, that's when they start solidifying a little bit, you know, for the first time. And that was where I was given like really hard environment to work with, you know? So I came back from that, and I think it made me grow and develop a lot, because leading by force, no matter who you are, is like, you will come out of it the other side, and it takes a repetition to lead. That's what people forget too. You literally have to do reps of it. There's books, there's people that are good at it naturally, but everybody has repetitions of it, because that will just ultimately be so much better, because there's things that you'll find through the cracks and through people and how you conversate that you would never think about or realize from any book, from anybody else's experience except your own.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all little moments, you know, and like, you could be in theory a good leader, but no situation is the same, you know? And so, you know, looking back on it, I personally, when it comes to leadership, like, I've always been someone that I prefer to lead by example, because I think talking is bullshit, you know?
Right.
And there's been so many times where, you know, you've got that like players only or locker room speech or pregame speech or whatever. And it's like, we're going to do this. And then none of that shit happens. Or
none of it happens.
You know, I'm going to do, and this also, you know, bleeds into like professional and business stuff as well. But I just can't stand when people say things and don't do them. Like,
exactly.
And there is a difference between like getting someone riled up and like, we're going to go shit on them, like whatever, because that's ultimately not really in your control. You know, like, that's just like, that's not really saying like, that's not a declarative sentence. It's just, I don't know what the word would be for that. Like, you're just trying to get everyone hyped up, you know, like, I get that. But to say that you're going to have a standard or set a standard or uphold a standard, and then the action not follow that up, it's like, you're better off just like keeping your mouth shut and then taking the action. And then eventually people are going to see that, rather than saying, I'm going to do this. And then that alone right there, you're poking holes in your own leadership. Because if you say you're going to do it and then the action doesn't follow up, everyone's going to see that and be like, okay, well, he says that stuff, but he doesn't actually do it. So we're not going to listen to him anymore.
Yes. Oh my God. That is so true. And, you know, like, I think everybody, like, if you've been in a leadership role and you think you haven't made a mistake, you are wrong. Yeah. I knew fundamentally when I made mistakes on that deployment, and I say I wish I could take them back, but they were growing pains of learning, like working with a platoon sergeant and having arguments, working with a commander overseas who was not my commander, you know, having a few of my guys get drunk, and then I have to try to either counsel them or have their back, right? It's like, you figure out these things from those reps, and you're better off putting your foot in front of it instead of putting your mouth in front of it, you know? Right. And like, I wish I did that more younger, because I think it would have prepared me even more, but I was put in the spot to do so. Like, I was put in those positions to do so.
Yeah.
And I think it's weird. People don't really have, you know, these opportunities in the civilian world to necessarily do it in the same way, because it's less structured.
Yeah.
It's such a free for all. Like, your boss might not have ever led people, and then they're your boss for the first time.
Yeah.
Or they might have been there from seniority, but they don't care to be there. Like, they didn't really want to be in that position. So there's really interesting dichotomies between it, you know. But I found some interesting ways in the Army to make it not only fun for me, but made me feel like I could get past imposter syndrome in a couple ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are funny ways to be in a leadership role in the Army. There are ways that you need to kind of flex your leadership. So I'd find some fun ways to do it, because I worked on my strengths. So even though I wasn't prepared to be an officer necessarily, I wasn't prepared to be where I was at, I knew my strengths. I was like, okay, you're physically fit. And what the guys relate to, what they think you should be, is what they are at that ground level, right? So when you're a ground and pound soldier in the infantry, you should be in really good shape, and you should be able to shoot well, and you should be able to do land navigation. They don't necessarily look at you as like, oh, well, I don't really know what he does behind the scenes, but they think you should be doing those things. And there's always this funny like perception that the officer's more motivated and they like know how to run a lot, but they're not like really like fighters, you know, and they're not really like tough dudes. So I'd find ways to fuck with them. Like, I really would. Like, when my unit was going for pre-deployment train up, you know, I would find ways to physically make things challenging when they would try to challenge me as a leader, because I knew it was a challenge. Like, they'd poke and prod the bear saying, what are we going to do for this? Or what are we going to do for this day? You know? And so when I was younger, I had gotten a few guys that kind of gave me like a little bit of shit about something like, oh, it doesn't really look like, sir, it doesn't really look like you can really like hold your own with this. And I was like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
But it's just sort of like the shit talking banter that, you hear in a locker room, but everybody looks at the boss to like see what he does. Right. So there's times I didn't do this well, but there's a couple times I did. And there was a few times where the bring Sally up push-up challenge.
I was wondering if that's where you're going with this. Yeah.
Funny, dude. It was the funniest day because I think somebody had given me shit about like, oh, I bet you haven't even taken like a PT test in a while. You just get to like sign your own because like as an older officer, most of them don't take a PT test again.
That sounds kind of old, isn't it? Like to chirp you like that. Like,
oh yeah.
Is it? Yeah. Like that doesn't happen really, right?
Well, no, it does because you're supposed to give the new guy shit. Like when I was even a captain, it was like, there was like a level of respect you give an officer, but like you can still like nudge them and give them a hard time when you
gotta
not
do it the right
officer.
way.
Yeah, which
can't
like
be
most
like
people do.
Disrespectful outwardly, but
yes.
Yeah.
And like truth be told too, like when you're an officer they'll fuck with you more.
Yeah.
Like I've seen an officer get duct taped and it's not because they hated the guy. The guy was very like he was a cool dude and he was a cool dude about it, but man, they really got him good when they duct taped him to a pole outside. Wow. Hilarious. So I'd been challenged once or twice about certain things and it wasn't challenged in a bad way, right? It was just banter. And so I'm like, yeah, like I'm going to lead some PT today. And everyone's like, okay, okay, let's see what the officer plans together. And I was like, it's all good, but we're just going to do a couple push-ups. And they're like, okay, fine. Like half the dudes are like huge dudes. And I'm like, yeah, we're just going to do it by tempo push-ups. And they're like, okay, like how many? I'm like, oh, it's only going to be like 30. That's all it is for Bring Sally Up. It's like 30 push-ups.
Yeah.
So I turned on like a speaker outside and we did Bring Sally Up. And I was like, oh, by the way, and if you don't make it, then you get to run with me after. So like you just got to complete 30 and then I'm going to go take a run after.
Yeah.
That's it. So I knew my strengths, push-ups, running. Mm-hmm. We're good to go. So we did the Bring Sally Up push-up challenge. Dwindled down to, oh man, not even 10 push-ups in. Some of those shit talkers were already out. And I was like, this can't be difficult. And it was just down to me and two other guys that could actually do the whole challenge, start to finish tempo style. Where I sat there on the front and looked at all of them as they were doing, like there's no way to bullshit this, right?
Yeah.
It's slow up, slow down by tempo. And then we went and I ran the whole group after and I got silenced the rest of the day. Nobody gave me shit about my fitness level from that point on because they saw that as important. And I was like, oh, I know what they know is important. They don't know that that's like 5% of my job or less. You're in shape as an officer, but that's not your primary job. Your primary job is not being in shape. A private's primary job very heavily relies on being in shape, not mine. Being in charge of the group. I just have to maintain a standard, but I don't need to. That's not the pinnacle of an officer, right?
Right.
So, but it was good to relate to them that way. And so like I would go to the gym with them later, and I was involved with my guys as much as I could be, whereas some officers like kind of regress backwards and then they are the ones that are like, oh, well, what's the boss doing? He's always in a meeting. He never like hangs out with us. He doesn't show up at the gym, like just showing up in the right places. And it made me feel like less imposter syndrome, even though I didn't know shit about what I was doing sometimes, but I got more acceptance from my guys so they could trust me and then I could trust them when I could turn around and say, hey, I don't actually know, like I need some help. Yeah. Then they would actually help me instead of like throwing me under the bus.
Yeah. That's such a, dude, joking with like a coach or like someone in a leadership position is just such a dangerous game. I never fucked with it. I was like, because the thing is I feel like things get lost in translation so easily. And like, I remember one time in college where it was just some game we were playing like end of training. And I made a joke. Like it wasn't even like, I think I said something about like the punishment. Like they said like, oh, this is the punishment. And I was like, oh, I've been there, done that. Like my point was like, I lost already a bunch of times. Like this is nothing new to me. And my coach took that as me being like snarky. And he just made me like, it's called a shark crawl. You ever hear of a shark crawl?
No, I don't think I've heard of a shark crawl.
It's ridiculous. You literally like, you look like, like in Nazi zombies when like you like throw a grenade and like blow the zombie's legs off and it's like crawling at you. That's what you look like. And so you have to do that like I did that from the end line to the 18 and back like 6 times. So you're just dragging yourself on with your hands. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know where that came from or why that was a thing that we did, but yeah, I had to do that.
Nice.
And the thing, but that again, like, I mean, even myself being in the position of like being a coach, I know, you run into a bunch of different personalities. Some people like, you know, that they mean nothing by it. Like, they're just, you know, just chirping, whatever. And it's like, yeah, we can have a laugh. Like, as long as you're ready to train when it's time to train, like, I don't really care.
Right.
But then there's other people that I don't think they know where the line is. And then they'll like keep pushing and pushing. And then that's when I feel like, I think I've always been good at giving off like just the change in my tone of like, okay, now it's time to take shit seriously, you know?
Right.
Like, and I'm very lighthearted all the time. Like, it takes a lot to piss me off, but there's been occasions where you just have to get mad just to let everyone know that it's like, it's time to be serious, you know?
Right.
And it's just a product of dealing with all different types of people, you know, because not everyone's going to have been in that position where they're like, you know, they're always pushing the limit.
Yep.
And they've never been called on it. And so then this would be the first time it's happening. And then they're like, that's a whole new experience for them.
Right.
And I want to say before, I hate being wrong. Like, I hate being wrong. And I think it stems from my childhood. And I think it stems from one moment when I was like 6 years old. I was at my grandparents' house and I called 911, like on just like in a bedroom phone. And I called, they answered, I hung up. I think my pap was on the phone in the other room. And I guess I don't know who he was talking to. I don't even remember. This is like, you know, before cell phones. And whoever he was talking to said that there was just like a 911 hang up, and everyone knew it was me right away. And I felt so fucking guilty. And I really think that lives with me to this day, where it's like just being in the wrong bothers me so much. And so then you have to take that into account too, because, you know, you can call someone on something, but you might not have the full grasp of the situation. Like, you don't know where they were coming from, or like what, you know, all of the elements of the moment, you know? And so that's a hard thing, I think, about being a leader as well, because you have your initial like knee-jerk reaction as to like the way things should go, but then you could be missing some details as well that maybe would have changed how you reacted. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's where it takes that time to spend the time with those people. Like, there's like a level, you know, especially as an officer, there's a level of like, I can go out and have a couple beers with them, but I cut out early. You know, like, you got to kind of like taper off. Like, you can't be the boss that's out there till 4 a.m. making the mistake. Yeah. You got to cut yourself off. Be like, oh, I'm going to wean off at like midnight, and then put somebody else in charge and be like, get back here by, you know, 2, 3 a.m. Yeah. Because we got work to do tomorrow. Right. But spending that time with them like helps, like digging deeper and getting to know people, and like trying to sit at their level a little bit as a boss is tremendous. And, you know, I've had a friend or two, like I've had one specifically that just didn't do that as an officer. Like, it wasn't his personality type. He was always more reserved, and his guys pushed that line, and they pushed the limit more and more and more. And it affected how he could do his job. And he just kept pulling back more. And I think it was just the way that he had his upbringing, you know, he wasn't in sports. And I think it just affected how he leads, because he couldn't lead because they were just kind of like dominating everything. Yeah. And like, especially in the Army, especially in the job that I was in, there's just alpha males. Like, that's what they are. They're cavemen with like large egos. Mm-hmm. But man, they will sacrifice anything for you. But like, holy shit, they are some characters, man. Yeah. And they are some wild dudes that you got to keep in line in some way, which is hard to do. But at the same time, you can't just like keep a leash on dudes that like fundamentally don't ever want a leash on them. Yeah, you know, it's the weirdest dichotomy of people. Yeah. And it's I think that's the main point, is like, it's so fluid. Like, nothing is black and white when you're dealing with people. Like, when it's like an interpersonal thing, like, it's just never going to be like, there's never going to be a card you can refer to and be like, well, this happened, so then I got to do this. Like, there's always just so much happening. And I think that's what makes it so difficult. Yeah. And I think that's what makes the Army a well-oiled machine, but also not, because there's a standard of an officer knows this much when he comes in, right? And so everybody knows, like, you know where your rules are and you know your training. So there's a level of a standard of like, well, it's expected of you to know these things because you are an officer. You are expected to do X amount of work because you are in charge of that group, you know, but it doesn't go beyond that. Like, you have to fundamentally, as a person, really like put yourself out there more and take chances at like being a leader instead, because that's the best way to learn it. I mean, there's no other way to do it. Yeah.
It's so interesting here talking about this too, because obviously like I have no military experience. You do. And I think leadership in general, leading groups of people, they kind of like lump, you look at like high level sports teams, the military, giant businesses, they all get kind of lumped together, but obviously the stakes are different for each one. And I think that's the point I was going to make is like with the Army, like the stakes are the highest. Like they're not, you don't have that anywhere else, but then you have your own level of like high stakes in different things. And, I think that's just the interesting perspective that I find, like hearing you talk about it. Cause I've always thought about that, like, cause I knew we'd talk about this eventually. And because at the end of the day, for me, I always come back to the point where I'm like, well, like this isn't life or death, when I'm like,
right.
Coaching kids or like, playing a game, I can always come back to that and be like, well, it's not life or death. Like there's more than this, but like in the context of the military, it literally is.
Yeah.
And it has to change it so much.
Yes, it does. It creates a really high stress environment, and you find ways to cope with that with each other. There's ways like you make absurd jokes. You do absurd things with each other in the field that are just preposterous. I mean, I can't even go into some details here. They are just preposterous stories, where, joking about injuries is hilarious. Joking about an accidental death to guys in the Army is hilarious.
Wow.
It's a way of coping. It's just hilarious. Huh. But that's not a normalcy outside of there.
Nope.
That environment sounds crazy. Or joking about the fact that everybody drinks in the Army and everybody kind of does drink in the Army. Like that's not a normalcy, but it's a way of coping. And it's a way of getting past where you might be so like, if you really thought about it, like going to the Middle East is scary. Being in an environment where you're like one of the only gringos and you're in a Jeep driving around in the desert and you're like, wow, like if you overthought about where you're driving around and what could happen, you would be chronically anxious. Like there would be no way that you could operate. So you just got to learn to like sit in those moments and be like, well, hey, it always could be worse, like we're here in the desert doing some dumb Army work, but man, it could be worse, but I can't wait to get home. Like there's ways that coping happens, you know, and those bonds, it's almost like trauma bonding where like you have very tight relationships because it's so extreme, and you have really tightness with that group of people. So I think what makes that hard is like that's a hard thing to replicate outside of those environments, I think sports teams do it very well, obviously at every level. They're like a building block to doing that. The Army is not even a building block. It's an extreme version of that. So then how do you set yourself up for goals to have this in the civilian world? Like, what do you do to give yourself enough friction that's comfortable and achievable, but also challenging so that you have a reason to have motivation and a reason to maybe lead somebody and like really drive into some of that purpose. And I think some of goal setting, like that happens for us.
Yeah.
I think setting a physical goal and challenges is really one of those fundamental pillars that everyone should do to get themselves out of comfort zone and feel friction and maybe develop a team or teamwork with people that you have to opt into because it's not a part of your job, but you find a way to do it.
Yeah.
So going into goals.
I knew you were going to go here. I was thinking the same thing, but no, before we do that though, I think there is something to be said about, because getting into the tail end of that conversation, it becomes about culture, which is a whole other podcast in itself. But I find that shit really interesting. And because you can look at culture on the most micro sense or the most macro sense. Like, you could talk about whole towns, you could talk about organizations. And having been on two opposite sides of that, where it's like in high school, like we didn't really have a strong sense of culture, where it's like, other schools, like football games, you're going all out. Like you're doing this after, we had maybe a little bit, but I know now it doesn't exist anymore. Like all that stuff is gone. And I just find it so interesting that like it comes and goes in different ways. It just depends on what it is. But anyway, yes, getting into goals. We'll talk about that later, but yeah. So goals for 2024.
Setting goals for 2024.
Goals. What goals do we have? What goals have we set?
How do
we set them? Yeah.
How do you set goals? Okay. So the how goes to what we were talking about a little bit. So the way that I've been thinking of goals for this next year for myself, I'm setting personal goals, professional goals, the whole works, right? I think I've learned about myself that I need competitions. So I set a lot of goals based on replicating those competitions. The competition structure is where I start basing things off of, and having events to go to is where I think the biggest building blocks for my goals are set. So personally, I'm setting some fitness goals that are related to doing the tactical games again in May when they come to Pittsburgh. And so I'm setting a standard of like, okay, well, that's in May. What can I start working on now? Because I don't need a 6-month training program necessarily. Isn't going to be identical to the first few months versus the last few months. So I'm setting that up as a fitness goal that's related to what can I achieve, get to another step. What's that next step going to look like? And what have I learned from doing the tactical games specifically last year that I need to work on is a really big one. But that's a way to make a marker and look at a metric to try to at least set something for yourself. Because I think it's hard to set it if you have no direction. I think that's like one of the bigger things. So what's your take on it?
So the way that I approach it is, I will say this year was years ago when I got into like fitness, right? Like actually taking that stuff seriously. I used to make a note in my phone of like, I want to, hit this amount for this lift, this amount of consecutive pull-ups. And I would have a whole thing. Then every time I hit one, I would just put like the green check emoji next to it, re-screenshot it, reset it as my wallpaper. Haven't done that in a few years. I just did it again for the first time. Now, the way that I look at it is like I set short-term goals that are like very achievable. And then I have the long-term goals, which are probably about a year, maybe 18 months out. Because the saying, and I use this with my clients, is that people overestimate what they can do in 12 weeks, but they underestimate what they can do in a year. So I know that the short-term ones I have are very achievable, but the point is I know I'm going to achieve them, and so that kicks off some momentum for me. Like, you get that dopamine hit or whatever it is whenever you achieve that goal. And then the idea is that I'll be able to achieve 4 out of, I think the 6 I have, 5 out of 6. And then you just reevaluate and do it again. And then, you could look at those and be like, max amount of time that's going to take me is 6 months. But then you're going to surprise yourself and do it in like 2 months. And now you've smashed like 12 sets of goals in a year. And then that's where that overestimation of what you can do in a year comes in.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the time people go too big too fast. They're like, I want to do this. And it ends up being a way more lofty goal than they think it is. And so it's like, yeah, when you achieve that, you're going to feel awesome, but there's no reason why you can't have some minor ones that are sending you on that path.
Right.
And so then it doesn't feel as shitty, because it's like, you've just got this, I've got this whole period of emptiness where I'm not achieving anything, just trying to achieve that one thing, where it's like, you could set yourself up where you've got, okay, 1, 2, 3, like a bunch of little ones. And it's like, okay, now I'm really working my way there. And I know I am, because I've achieved all this other stuff too.
Yeah, no, like that's a perfect example, because for me to do the tactical games I think it's in May, that's perfect because there's little sections that I'm setting up myself to win that, to win, not to win the event, by the way, because that's very hard to do, but to win compared to what I did last year, which was, I was like, I went out there for fun and I knew what to expect because they give you like some expectations on there. But now I'm like, okay, what are some long-term ones within it? Because I know I'm going to show up at that date. So what are the differences in the goals now going to be, and what's achievable first and foremost, and then how am I going to get there, slowly progressing to those harder ones?
Yeah, that's good, because you can really only compete against yourself in an event like that. When you're in an individual event, like, yes, you want to win, but you don't have any control over anybody else. And if you start worrying about everybody else, now you're not worried about yourself, and like your performance is going to take a dip. Yeah. And so if you can just really focus on like, okay, I want to beat myself the last time I did this, then it's a win. Exactly.
But it's good. And like, I encourage people to try an event of some sort, like find something you actually like doing and make it an event. Like find some sort of event in it, whether that's running or rock climbing or a shooting competition or CrossFit or whatever it is. Give yourself the challenge of putting an event, because it does give you a little bit of a marker to look for. But then it also, like, once you get there, then you might realize, oh, I really don't want to be doing this, or I really do want to be doing this.
Yeah.
And I think it's that weird gray area where it's like you set up maybe fitness goals to bench a certain amount or squat a certain amount, but like, if you don't really have a purpose or point, which is what we talked about the last podcast, if there's not a lot of purpose behind it, it's really easy for you to start opting out of different parts of it. or maybe getting overwhelmed because you're like, oh my God, I set this lofty goal. It doesn't really have any relationship to something else in your life. I think that's where it's kind of like a little bit of a miss for people, where they set a goal because there's no relationship to something else. It's easy to just figure out a way to like not progress with it,
Yeah.
And especially if you don't like it. I think some people get caught up in thinking they want to do something or like something, and the goal is like, oh, I admire people that do that, so I'm going to try to do it. They really start to get into it, and it's like, that's not fundamentally who they are. So deep down, if there's no passion driving it, where would you even get yourself in that goal? Like, the end state is you're just going to be frustrated.
Yeah.
You're going to be more frustrated of not achieving it, and you're going to be just as frustrated because you didn't really like it in the first place.
Oh yeah. I think that's, huge with fitness. And in my opinion, if you want to change the way you look, then there's a way you need to go about that, right? But if you just want to be fit, like just increase your fitness, you have to find the right way to do it for you, And like, there's people that I talk to that are like runners that like, they just love running. And I'm like, well, just keep doing that, unless you also tell me like, hey, I want to be jacked. I'm like, well, okay, well, you can't run your way to being jacked. So now you've got to change something. But for people that don't have like serious, like, weight loss goals, or I want to have a chest like Arnold or something like that. Like, you're not worried about the physique aspect. Finding the right modality of fitness is vital, because if it's something you enjoy, you're going to keep doing it. And then, a byproduct of that is you're going to get more fit.
Exactly. I've enjoyed climbing more than I ever thought I would. I've been doing it now almost 2 years, and I've been pretty consistent. I would say I go 3 days a week, but I have now, for the first time, literally this year, setting a climbing goal, because I'm getting pretty good at it, which is great, but I'm getting better at it in a sense where I'm like, now let's make some competitive action towards a new thing within it, instead of just getting better at the sport.
Yeah.
Because then now I actually have a little bit of a training idea of what I want to do. To climb a 12A outside, like a graded 12A is like a really big deal. And like, so that's a goal for me. And it's not a goal I'm putting a time limit to. It's like, that's my goal with climbing. Like, if I ever got to that level, I think I'd be very satisfied that I was able to figure out how to get to that level. And then in general, I do know that if you get to that climbing ability, there's certain things in and out of a gym that are going to be good. Like, I'll probably be good enough to do a competition in general and kind of just not feel like I was in last place.
Yeah.
Right. So, but that only came from the fact that I liked going, and my love of going and that consistency of going just sprouted into figuring out, oh yeah, I like it so much to the point where I'm learning more and I'm passionate and I'm finding some end result from this now for the first time.
Yeah. So you mentioned doing a competition and then also CrossFit. I'm doing the CrossFit Open this year for the first time ever.
Oh, he is.
Yeah.
No more curling in the squat rack. Now you really got to put in some work.
Oh yeah. And
handstands,
Yeah. Well, yeah, we've talked about that, but it's, so, I've been interested in CrossFit for years. Like, in college, I was watching the YouTube stream of like because the Open, the way that it works is they take like, high level athletes, the ones that are going to be competing in the games, and they'll take them to, some location, and then the workout gets announced. Like, they don't know the workout ahead of time. They find out the same time as everybody else, and they just do it.
Mm-hmm.
And the point of the Open is that everyone that does CrossFit can do it, because you can scale it down however you want. Like, that's the thing about CrossFit. It's like infinitely scalable. And a couple years ago, like, I looked at the workouts and I was like, yeah, I could do that. But now that I've done CrossFit like pretty consistently for the past 6 months or whatever, like, now I understand like how, you get a really good idea of like what's easy and what's not. And that goes into my other goals as well. Like, I can't do a double under consistently, like with a jump rope. And that's never been a thing that I've ever trained, because I'm like, why would I ever need to train that? But in CrossFit, like, you do double unders a lot.
Really?
And it's not,
I actually didn't know that.
It's not a fitness thing though. It's like, it's purely just like a rhythm and like a coordination thing. And I've been hammering them. I've been whipping the shit out of myself with the rope. But if I want to actually complete the CrossFit Open, like actually be able to do the workouts, I have to be able to do a double under consistently, like 50 straight or something like that. So that starts in March. I've got a little bit of time, but my initial goal of it is just to complete it. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do, because you just don't know what the workouts are going to be, like where you're going to get exposed, like what your strengths are, what weaknesses are going to come up that you just don't know about. So, I mean, I think that's the name of the game. The CrossFit is like it's skills. Like I used to think it was all about strength. Like, oh, I've got to squat 500 pounds if I want to be good at CrossFit. In reality, you could squat 500, but if you can't do a pull-up, I mean, that's it. That's all you have. You know, you might as well just go be a power lifter, because it's not, you just can't have like, you can't double down on one aspect of CrossFit. There's so much to it. And that's why I like it so much.
That was how I felt after the tactical games, because it was very cross-functional workouts into shooting. So it was sort of like weighing the difference between those workouts and being able to shoot with a rifle and pistol, which is very like, I wasn't sure where I'd land between the two things. And I figured out my strengths and weaknesses there. And it was really interesting, because it's kind of the same thing. You don't know the events until, I think they shoot them to you in an email 2 days before you show up each time. Mm-hmm. And the events you've seen them online, like broad strokes, like you can look up what people have been doing, sandbag carries at a certain amount of weight, climbing ropes at a certain amount of weight, everything you're wearing a plate carrier vest on. So you know, cross-functional training. It's probably even less structured than CrossFit, because there's some events that they do, like they're stakeholder ones that are at the tactical games. Not every single one, but pretty much. And then there's some that they throw in that are new. It's like the one event that I did that was brutal. It's called the Stairway to Heaven. It's a 5-story building, and you take sandbags up and down it, and you take, I think it was a 30-pound, a 50-pound, and a 70-pound, I think. Don't quote me on that. And you take each one up at a time. And once you get to the top, you drop it, you shoot medium range with a rifle at top, and then you run back down and grab another one. You come back up, you shoot again. So speed, strength, endurance, accuracy, bringing your heart rate down to shoot.
Yeah.
Brutal. So you go up and down 5 times, and then guess what? You bring all the sandbags back down to complete the event. Wow. And there was a time hack on that one. I made it by 10 seconds on that event, but I think statistically about 40% of all the people in my division failed that event because they couldn't hit the time hack.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like playing a tactical game on like a strategy on, okay, you are only allowed to bring up one bag at a time, and then you have to shoot. So you want to hustle those. When you come down, you can bring multiple at a time, but you are fatigued, like really fatigued.
Yeah.
So walking down with 150 pounds on your back, are you going to make it going back down, or do you think you need to go back up and down again?
Yeah. Walking down with weights way different than walking up.
Scary, man.
Yeah.
It was scary. So like that was the hardest event, like the hardest single event there. But I think the biggest part about the tactical games, like for that event specifically, was everything was a warehouse from an old nuclear power plant. So it was very much a different strategic feel than prior games had been for locations, because the locations change and the events change. So there's some staple events that are always there. And then for this one, it was, you're carrying down bags up and down steps while you have to shoot. So you might not have prepped for that, but there's a level that you have to just maintain for stress shooting and your fitness level to be able to complete that event. So I think that's what made the tactical games really fun and dynamic, because you didn't really know what you were going to get yourself into per event, and they do change. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, Will, I think you should try one of these with me. If you ever get the chance and opportunity.
I would do it. I would do it 100%. I mean, because it's a very different type of, it's a different type of fitness. I mean, we've talked about before, like I said, like Rich Froning, he won the CrossFit Games 4 times. Like at his time, he was the best. And he trains, like he's a big, like bow hunter. Like he did this thing, where he went out into the mountains of, I don't know where exactly it was, but I think he was like hunting either a caribou or an elk. It was something massive. But the whole point was that there was no assistance. Like he went out with like a squad. They found the animal, they killed it, but then they carried it back down, just them. Like they didn't have like ATVs or anything like that. Like he's carrying like the head on his shoulders, which is crazy. But he trains, like he does CrossFit, but then he implements like, shooting his crossbow like in between rounds. And like I think that's exactly how I would imagine that's exactly how you'd have to train for something like that.
Yeah. You try to elevate your heart rate and then try to bring it back down. So there's a level of like zone 2 HRV optimization that you need, because you can't just bring your heart rate down magically. So you have to practice that. But then you also have to, on the other end, practice shooting with a higher heart rate. So it's really weirdly dynamic on top of your fitness training and your strength training.
Yeah.
So it's very dynamic. Like the people that win, I'm still trying to figure out how people get so good at it. You know, like I'm trying to write a program for it once I get better. Now that I've seen the first style of how it was, now I'm going to do it round 2 here in Pittsburgh. So when they come to Pittsburgh, I'll be here doing the CrossFit Games in May.
Hell yeah. Tactical games.
Not the CrossFit Games. I am not doing the CrossFit Games. I need to go try CrossFit. I'll probably help with this, but
I think it could.
Hey, in all fairness, you come climb with me and I'll come do CrossFit and we'll just make we'll just make a fun afternoon of it.
Yeah, I'm down.
Yeah. I'll see if you can climb for longer than 45 minutes, which is about the average for a grip until it just goes.
The one time I did it, I think I made it about 30. So
yeah.
I mean, it's way harder than I thought it was going to be.
Harder in a different way because you're probably strong enough to just make the actual climb
stuff. Like I can do stuff, but it's like I didn't anticipate. I mean, like your hands, it makes perfect sense, but I didn't think my hands would wear out like they did.
Yeah. It's crazy stuff.
Yeah, but hey, fitness is fitness at the end of the day.
Fitness is fitness. And as long as you enjoy it, I think that's the biggest thing is like all of these takeaways from this, like find things and places that you enjoy for fitness is, I think, the biggest thing that will help with anything. Setting goals, having imposter syndrome. If you get yourself into enjoying what you're doing, that's more important than anything else.
Yeah. You got more longevity in it for sure. Because you're doing it for other reasons besides just feeling like you have to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So where should we drop our socials now at this point, I think? Where can we find you on social media?
Typically, probably the easiest place to find me and probably the best place to contact me if you ever needed to work on anything or just be able to reach out to me is at Ethan Merritt Official on Instagram. And then also I have a company called Pose Fitness and we have the Pose Fitness app on Instagram as well. On here, you can also find a YouTube channel, just my name, Ethan Merritt. Yeah, and that's where you'd find me.
All right. And for me, Instagram is the same, at @willmarshall_1 and my website, marshallfitnesstraining.com. And I guess YouTube now is where you'd find the podcast, but they'd already be listening or they'd already know that if they've made it this far.
I guess they would, yeah. Unless you have other content up there, so.
I have some, yeah. At @willmarshall_1 is also my YouTube channel. So yeah, there's some shorts and stuff like that on there as well.
Anyways, thanks for listening.
Anyways, yeah. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next one.